Zoomer Issues, Zoomer Candidates, a Zoomer Debate. Presented by CARP.
Welcome to Zoomer Issues, Zoomer Candidates, a Zoomer Debate, presented by CARP. I'm Libby Znaimer. This election, it really is all about Zoomers, with politicians of all stripes wooing the so-called senior vote. 70% of Canadians over the age of 65 vote regularly in federal elections, more than any other demographic. CARP, Canada's largest association for older Canadians, has been raising awareness for the issues Zoomers care about: pension and health care reform, financial security, and caregivers' rights. That is the focus of this debate. We welcome the Honourable Bob Rae for the Liberal Party. He's the candidate in Toronto Centre. For the NDP, we have Wayne Marsden, candidate in Hamilton Stony Creek and the NDP critic for seniors and pensions. And for the Conservatives, we have Bernard Trottier, candidate in Etobicoke Lakeshore. Now let's go to our moderator, Susan Eng, Vice President of Advocacy for CARP. Susan?
Thank you very much, Libby. Welcome, everyone, to the studio audience and out there to the CARP debate. This election campaign is at its midpoint, and already the major parties have addressed issues that matter to the 350,000 CARP members across the country, and indeed anyone who cares deeply about our quality of life as we age. Now, CARP Advocacy has called on all the parties to deal with retirement security, health care, and support for family caregivers. And so far in this election campaign, all of the parties have actually addressed this in their platforms. That may not be a surprise to you, but it is a big surprise to me, who have watched many election campaigns before. And this is an unprecedented focus on issues that matter to us. And indeed, all of these measures, if implemented, would represent a net improvement on the status quo. So let's get started. There's a countdown clock here that the debaters can see and I can see, and when it hits 0, I will interrupt and ask you to stop. The debaters have been briefed on the format, so I won't go over them again here, except to let the audience know that there will be 3 segments of about 14 minutes each, and then the debaters will have a chance to give their closing arguments. The debaters have drawn lots as to their speaking order, and the debaters have been introduced. I think, though, we should point out that the Honourable Bob Rae, Liberal candidate for Toronto Centre, was first elected in 1978 to the House of Commons, served until 1982, became later the leader of the Ontario NDP and Premier of the Province of Ontario from 1990 to 95, and since 2008 has been the Liberal MP for Toronto Centre. Welcome, Mr. Rae.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Bernard Trottier, first-time Conservative candidate for Etobicoke Lakeshore, past president of the Etobicoke Lakeshore Conservative Association, and a veteran of many political campaigns. And finally, beside me, Mr. Wayne Marsden, NDP candidate for Hamilton Stony Creek, was first elected in 2006, and I most recently met him as NDP critic for seniors and pensions. Now, for the record, we did invite Elizabeth May to join us, but her schedule did not allow her to participate in this debate. We look forward to chatting with her in the future. So first of all, thank you to all the candidates for participating and joining with us here today. I look forward to a great CARP debate. So we'll start first with the opening statements, 1 minute each, 1.5 minutes each, excuse me, and the lots were drawn, and we will start with Mr. Wayne Marsden.
Well, thank you, Susan, and I want to thank CARP for this opportunity to put seniors' issues front and center in this campaign. In fact, the NDP has done that for many years. Back in 2006, the NDP put a motion to Parliament called the Seniors' Charter, which gave guaranteed adequate housing, secure income, and health care. Mind you, the government of the day didn't follow through on after they passed that. June 9th of 2009, on our Opposition Day motion, we were the first to propose increasing the GIS for seniors living below the poverty line, over 300,000, mostly women. And as well, we talked about doubling the CPP, because 63% of working Canadians today have no pensions and no savings. We have to do something for the future. National Pension Insurance Plan that would protect pensions when the companies default. And the other thing we think that is needed is a dedicated minister for seniors. And I'm surprised that Mr. Fantino isn't here today. We don't have an MP And no offense to Bernard, but you would think the government would think enough of seniors to send a minister or at least a member of parliament here today. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you very much. Next, Mr. Trottier. Bernard.
So first of all, I wish to thank CARP for hosting what's called the annual CARP Debate. It's a very important debate, and we really look forward to engaging our seniors community across Canada and in Toronto area. I want to thank you, Susan, also for hosting the debate, and Libby Sniber for playing a meaningful part. I also want to say how delighted I am to be here with Wayne Marston and with Bob Ray. You're both very experienced members of Parliament, and I know we all share the same goals of doing what's best for Canada and doing what's best for seniors. As a Conservative candidate for Etobicoke Lakeshore, I'm looking forward to bringing strong, effective representation to the proud riding of Etobicoke Lakeshore. In this election, the Conservative Party is running on its record, so let me just highlight some of those achievements. We've got, first of all, one of the best performing economies in the OECD, making Canada the envy of the world and a magnet for investment, jobs, and talent. We've been lowering taxes across the board, leaving more money in Canadians' pockets. We've introduced the tax-free savings account. Specific to seniors since 2006, we've lowered the tax burden on seniors by raising the age credit amount twice. We've doubled the pension income credit. We've introduced income splitting, which is very significant for seniors, and we've increased the age limit for maturing pensions. And finally, we've invested over $400 million in better housing for low-income seniors through the Economic Action Plan. The Conservative Party platform, captured in our budget, contains significant measures that assist seniors, especially those most financially vulnerable. I look forward to expanding on this platform during our discussion.
Thank you. Mr. Ray.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here again and to have a chance to share ideas and points of view. I know Mr. Bernard talked about how Wayne and I are experienced. I think he was referring to the fact that we're a little older, and we're delighted. I'm delighted to be here and have a chance to share some perspectives with visitors. I think this campaign is really about two key things. The first thing it's about is about character. It's about the character of this government, because we're here because this government was defeated in the House of Commons because the House of Commons found them to be in contempt. And there's a lot of issues around the character of the government that I'm going to want to talk about today that I think need to be addressed. The honesty of the government, the openness of the government, the way in which it addresses issues, the way in which it relates to people right across the board. And the second thing it's about, obviously, is ideas. We put forward some very specific ideas in the campaign on helping seniors, on responding to the poverty among seniors, dealing with the housing crisis in Canada, dealing with the caregiver crisis, which is very real and increasingly real as we get older as a population. These are the things we need to debate in a campaign. It seems to me they're important for Canadians to understand where each one of us is coming from. And I look forward to a good dialogue with Bernard and with Wayne, and look forward very much to the questions from the audience and a chance to talk about these things which are so important. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ray. We'll start with our first round of questions, and this question will be directed to Mr. Ray. This is according to the lots that were drawn earlier. The question is on retirement security. The recent economic downturn has made financial security top of mind for everyone, but especially for those already retiring or facing retirement, because they have fewer opportunities to change their financial circumstances. Canadians are not saving enough for their own retirement, and 2/3 of all working Canadians do not have a workplace pension to help them. Now, CARP has called for a supplementary universal pension plan that will help people reliably and adequately save for their own retirement. All levels of government have actually finally admitted that Canada's pension system needs some fixing and that government has a role to play. Now, current retirees also need some help. More than 250,000 Canadians today over the age of 65 live in poverty. According to the government's own statistics, single women are most at risk. 1.6 million Canadians actually receive the GIS, the Guaranteed Income Supplement, which by definition means they're facing some financial insecurity in their retirement. So, Mr. Ray, what will your party do to address the retirement security concerns of Canadians? What will you do to ensure that no senior today lives in poverty?
Thank you, Susan, for the question. Two things you've asked about. First thing on the GIS. Mr. Ignatieff has proposed very clearly in our platform, and by the way, everybody can look at our platform on liberal.ca. It's available for everybody to see. as is true for the other parties. So you won't find their platforms on our website. But first of all, we need to deal with the GIS issue very seriously, and we need to get at that. We've argued that there needs to be a $700 million increase in the GIS. We do think that we have to address the concerns of low-income seniors, and we have made huge strides over the last 30 years in dealing with the question of seniors in poverty. We need to do more. We also need an affordable housing strategy for seniors, not just something which takes place when we have an economic crisis, but something that's long-term and structural. On the pension issue, I think this is a huge question. I don't think we're talking about it enough in Canada. We do have a significant problem for a lot of people who are getting older who are not covered. We've argued that at the very first, right off the bat, we need to establish a voluntary contributory plan, a supplemental plan for the Canada pension. As you know, improving the Canada pension requires consensus with the provinces. It's not something the federal government can just do on its own. We do argue in our platform that the federal government needs to take the lead in dealing with the problem, the absence of an effective pension strategy, and we do need to add to the Canada pension plan, but that is going to require some real discussion and consensus with the provinces. And finally, we need to look and to deal with the problem of people who have private pensions, those private pensions not being protected. So when companies go into bankruptcy, get into difficulty, we need to make sure that there's protection for those plans and for those people. And we also need to ensure that they have some rights with respect to where that money will go. Right now, there's a very limited course that people can take to deal with it. Those are some of the things that we've suggested. I do think the pension debate is really going to happen. I hope we have a national conversation on pensions in the years ahead, because it's a critically important question.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. Mr. Trottier.
Yeah, so I agree with Bob, if I can call you Bob, about the critical importance of a new view on pensions. As you know, in December 2010, Minister Flaherty sat down with his provincial counterparts to talk about how can we address this. As you point out correctly, that this is it requires the consensus of the provinces. We have to work with them. It requires the consensus for any national plan of 7 out of 10 provinces with 70% of the population. So we're looking to, right now there's just a framework that's established. There's no concrete plans. In 2011, the intention is to sit down with the provincial finance ministers and other counterparts in the provinces to work out a plan for something called pooled retirement pension plans. Still some details that need to be developed. There's been some pushback around just increasing the contributions in the Canada Pension Plan, mainly from employers. They want to know what the cost is of this. What's this going to do to their, because these are a form of payroll contribution that will limit their flexibility when it comes to hiring people. So there's an economic impact when you force employers to make a contribution through their payroll deductions. So that's something that needs to be addressed. I will talk about the need, though, to think very globally, that we wouldn't want to put all the eggs in one basket of one pension plan. That's why this government introduced the tax-free savings account. Now, it might not affect too many seniors today, but soon-to-be seniors view this as a very important vehicle. We're looking to double the amount that people can contribute into that. One of the beautiful things about the tax-free savings account, and the reason why 4.7 million Canadians have taken advantage of it, is because the income that you take out of that, or the funds you take out of the tax-free savings account, are tax-free. So our general approach has been to, on the one hand, reduce the amount of taxes people are paying, especially lower income seniors. We've increased the GIS clawback amount significantly. Before, if you earned $500, the GIS would start to get clawed back. We've increased that amount to $3,500. So these are for seniors who are making income, doing things in their community, and making some kind of income. That helps them a lot. And then finally, to Bob's point, and I'm sure this is Wayne's point too, we do need to address affordable housing for seniors in a more consistent fashion. It's not a temporary one-time thing just because of the economic recovery.
Thank you, Mr. Trottier. Thank you. Mr. Marston.
One of the things I have a concern about is, I said earlier, we had a national motion in our Parliament in 2009 that talked about increasing the GIS, $700 million. In the House of Commons, it sounded like Mr. Ignatieff was applying for Jack Layton's job because they successfully would take on those things that we talked about. And I'm actually pleased to see that. But when you talk about increasing CPP and having a supplementary plan, that supplementary plan is voluntary. Well, you've got people today who aren't saving. Okay? Why are they going to save in this new plan? The Canada Pension Plan is portable. It's across our whole country. If you increase the assets of that plan, it's funded for 75 years. But the other thing is it is mandatory. The cost, Bernard, is 2.5% for the employee and 2.5% for the employer. Over 30 years would double that plan from $900 to $1,800. And at least our children and grandchildren will have something. Now, obviously, if you have the financial wherewithal to be using the tax-free savings plan, God bless you. I'm concerned about the people who are at the bottom end. The 300,000 people living in poverty. I went to 40 communities across Canada listening to these folks and had stories of women who told me they ate cat food. Now, you hear that in stories, but when that person is looking you in the eye and telling you that, a woman in Elliott Lake, when the HST came in, and these two, the government and the Liberals, voted that in, she told me how she had $2,100 a month, a year for her hydro. She had $1,162 a month income. Where is she going to get $160? You know, and there's endless stories like that. So we have to look at this in two places. The poverty that has to be addressed now, the immediate needs, and the future needs that our young people have. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ray, you have 1 minute to rebut anything that you've been criticized about.
Well, I'm used to criticism. I think the key thing is to focus on the couple of things. One is the CPP. It obviously requires leadership from the federal government. And I just say to Bernard, you know, if you go back to the origins of the CPP, the employers resisted it then. They didn't think it was a great idea then. We have a choice as a country. We either pay for it now or we pay for it later. And that's why I think we have to look about, as Mr. Ignatieff has proposed, a very practical approach is to say we're going to be phasing this in, but it does require the full participation of the provinces, which is why you know, in response to Wayne, you've got to deal with this question. You can't just announce you're going to do all these wonderful things with the CPP and then not deal with the fact that the provinces, many of the provinces, are not yet on board. That's a practical reality that we have to live with. I do think Canadians are looking for alternative savings vehicles of one kind and another. I think the voluntary proposal that's been made by us is one that's had a lot of support out there from people. It avoids a lot of the excess fees that are part of the Conservative plan, and I think it's a very practical proposal.
Well, thank you. We're going to go into the rapid round now, where I'm going to ask people to answer as quickly as they can. Yes, no answers will suffice. And but if you need to have a sentence to explain your point, you know, yes with an explanation or no with an explanation, that would be fine. But short, clear answers that we need from you. So first of all, the seniors' issues have been front and center during this campaign. They were absent from yesterday's Leaders campaign. That makes me nervous. I wonder whether or not it's only policy wonks like us who are watching for the campaign platforms. So how will your party, and what will you personally do to ensure that seniors' issues are front and center should you form government? Mr. Trottier.
Well, first of all, having an appointed minister responsible for seniors and applying that focused effort at the cabinet table is going to make sure that those issues are front and center. Obviously, the number of people who are seniors is increasing in this country, and so it needs to be addressed.
Fine, thank you, Seniors Minister. Mr. Marston.
To be very clear, Jack Layton and our party have been out front on this issue from the very beginning, around the year 2005, in fact. So it's a major commitment for us.
Mr. Ray.
Seniors Minister, and the political reality that demography is triumphing. The fact of the matter is all political parties are going to have to address this question because it is the makeup of the population that really counts.
Now, all of you have said that you're going to support expanding the CPP to a certain extent, depending if the provinces let you. Now, what kind of leadership is that? What will you do to make sure that there is some enhancement of this CPP, and by how much? Mr. Marston.
Well, I have traveled the country to 40 communities carrying the message to seniors that they're the #1 growing demographic. If anybody can put pressure on the government, you can. And the NDP is prepared to work with you to ensure that that happens.
Mr. Ray.
I think you have to bring political pressure to bear on the provinces in putting forward a very practical plan. And the second thing is I think we have to look overall at payroll taxes for employers, see what else we can do to provide tax breaks for small businesses and for those that might be affected by any increases in CPP. We really don't have a choice. We either pay for it now or we pay for it later as a society. That's why it's important for leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. Mr. Trottier.
So one of the things the people in my riding tell me is don't make promises we can't afford to keep. And so we're working with the provinces and recognizing provincial jurisdiction. Quebec runs its own pension plan, the QPP. Other provinces have said they're in favor of the pooled retirement pension plan program that they could administer either as a province individually or with other provinces.
Thank you, Mr. Trottier. Will you support a moratorium on mandated RIF withdrawals? Mr. Trottier.
We want to increase the age limit for mandatory age withdrawals. It's currently 71 years. We'd like to increase that further.
Thank you. Mr. Marston.
Yes.
Mr. Ray.
Yes.
Thank you. Will you? I like that part. Just answer yes to all my questions.
You have so much power
We're fine.
over all of us. It's amazing.
Right. Will you support auto enrollment for GIS? Mr. Ray.
Yes.
Mr. Trottier.
Yes.
Mr. Marston.
Absolutely.
So how come it hasn't happened?
Because we haven't been in government.
Well, somebody else has been in government. All right. Will you support full retroactivity for OAS and GIS and CPP payments if people did not manage to apply on time? Mr. Marston.
Absolutely.
Mr. Ray.
Absolutely.
Mr. Trottier.
That would be fair to seniors.
Hey, why hasn't it happened? Now, will you support giving pensioners greater protection when their employers cannot meet their pension obligations? Mr. Marston.
There should be a national pensions insurance plan. Absolutely.
Mr. Trottier.
No, in the sense that we don't want to create a moral hazard. Employers are responsible for funding their pension plans.
Mr. Ray.
I think we have to do more than we're doing, both at the provincial level and at the federal level.
Okay.
And I think there does have to be some greater protection for pensions.
Right. Will you support corporate tax cuts, Mr. Ray?
No, not now. I think we want it to go to 18%. And this is a critical difference between us and the others. We really do want to see attention paid to seniors, attention paid to health care. And as we've said all the way through, you can't be all things to all people. We think the banks and the oil companies should wait in line for their tax break until we get a balanced budget.
Thank you. Mr. Trottier.
Yes, and we're actually implementing the plan proposed by the Liberals originally. And we see it's the key to economic growth and investment.
So it's really their fault?
No, it's not their fault. We're actually giving credit where credit is due. They did the right thing, and we want to keep doing the right thing. The money has to come from somewhere.
Mr. Marsden.
Both of them are wrong. They've taken the tax cuts way too far. They've taken the fiscal capacity away from our government of close to $16 billion a year that we could be helping seniors with and other problems in our country.
Okay. Last question. Do you support a guaranteed minimum income for all Canadians? Mr. Trottier.
With conditions, yes.
Mr. Ray.
I think it's time. It's an idea whose time has come with the provinces and the federal government working together to make it happen. It requires both governments to do it.
Right. Mr. Marsden.
I do.
Thank you.
I think
I think we just had consensus on a very important issue, the recognition that the root cause of poverty in Canada is a lack of money.
It's true. People don't have enough money. That's absolutely right.
It's a PhD thesis.
So what are you running for, Susan?
I'm running for CARP, Vice President of Advocacy. And look at that, I've got that job. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We're going to move on to the next segment now. On health care. This was an issue that was only given short shrift, even in the leaders' debate, has not really been focused on enough, and yet this is top of mind for all of our members and all in Canadians, definitely, as they go to the polls. The party that wins this election will negotiate the next federal provincial health accord in 2014. Healthcare, hospital, drug costs are spiraling out of control and threaten to devour all the provincial budgets. Now, most experts have finally stopped blaming the aging population for these escalating costs, citing instead the high cost of new technologies and drugs, as well as the fact that people now take much more care of their own health and they draw on the healthcare system much more. Yet Canadians are still not getting the healthcare that they need, the services they expect, when and where they need it. And some so-called experts have said the solution is raising taxes, cutting services, imposing user fees, or start allowing private payment for health services. CARP members, instead, in our polling, say have consistently called for a fundamental restructuring of how we deliver health care in this country and find the cost savings there. So this question was assigned to Mr. Trottier. What will your party do to negotiate a new way of spending Canadian tax dollars on health care? What will you do to support family caregivers? How will you get drug costs under control?
So the first question, what will we do to renegotiate health care? So let me just state our record. So we've been in power for 5 years. We've increased health care transfers to the provinces by 33%. That's been 6% a year for 5 years compounded. Maintaining the health accord that was actually negotiated by the Liberals. And our plan will be to sit down with the province, understand what the needs are before we determine a precise number. The health accord will come due in 2014. So more on the specific details later, but our intent is that we're going to continue with a similar funding formula. The second question was about things like family care. And so in our budget, the low-cost plan for jobs and growth, we've also included a low-cost or a low-tax deduction for family care, realizing that's very important. A lot of families are taking care of seniors as well as children, and they need some tax relief to help them do that kind of thing. And then the last question was around pharmacare. So recognizing that there's plans that need to take into account the provincial area of responsibility when it comes to administering those things. So at the federal level, we're making sure that the funds are there. The provinces then have the responsibility for delivering on pharmacare.
All right, thank you. Mr. Ray.
I think when we first got health care in the late 60s, early 70s, the big cost was hospitals and doctors, and that was the focus. Now we recognize that things have really changed. The big cost for people today and for the system today is the cost of drugs, the cost of medication, and the fact that we're all getting older and living longer is a wonderful thing, but it also means that it poses a great challenge for the healthcare system generally. I'm very proud as Premier we were able to do some things on the Trillium Drug Plan, catastrophic drugs in Ontario. There are some provinces that don't have catastrophic drug care, which means that people can still be facing a financial catastrophe when they get sick, and that's a real problem that we have to deal with as a country. And I do think, and disagree with Bernard, I do think that health is a shared jurisdiction. We have to recognize the federal government has real responsibilities in health care. We have a Canada Health Act, and we do have to recognize the need to get care into the community, to deal with prevention and health promotion, to make sure that we've got a real partnership with the provinces on home care. We put forward a plan on providing assistance to caregivers on home care, which is a very practical plan. It's a richer plan than the one proposed by the Conservatives because the tax credit proposed is refundable. We think that's important. And we are looking forward to this renegotiation in 2014, but we can't wait until then. There's things we need to be doing now to prepare for that and to prepare for the fact that in order to maintain the system in its accessibility, in its affordability for Canadians, we also have to be prepared to keep changing it and keep improving it. And that's the real challenge that we face. And I do think the Liberal Party can speak with some authority with respect to our historical role in this area of saying there's more we need to do. We need to work with the provinces on it, but there does have to be a strong element of federal leadership to help make these changes happen.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. Mr. Marsden.
Well, the NDP has had a historical role in healthcare. Everybody knows where Tommy Douglas fit into that particular equation. One of the things we've got to do something about, and that's the number of hospital beds taken up by seniors that could be either at home under quality care or they could have long-term residential care. And we would put that under insurance, under Medicare, so that it falls under the Canada Health Act to ensure that you have quality protection for seniors, because you know the stories of some of the things that have happened in some of the care homes, and we have to be very cautious of that. The other thing that we speak a lot of is getting the number of doctors up. We have to immediately, and Bob, you're right, we have to react now for 1,200 doctors as quickly as we possibly can. The CMA has called for repatriating 300 family doctors out of country, give them an incentive to return. We also got to give incentives to our young people who are in university to come out, to stay in Canada once they're here. You can do that by saying, if you have a family practice for 10 years, we'll forgive your loans. If we are prepared to do those kinds of things as a country, we give the incentives to keep not only our doctors at home, but our own families. So I think that's very, very important. And home care, there's so many things that can be done. Obviously, people's homes have to have a certain amount of adjustments made to them for someone to be able to stay at home. And we would support them in that up to $35,000 of renovations to the house. Caregivers that stay home, family caregivers. They get 6 weeks from unemployment insurance at this point in time. That should be a minimum of 6 months. We all know that when people have a life-threatening illness, most of them take very close to that to resolve. So it's critically important that we support the families as well.
Thank you. Mr. Trottier, 1 minute rebuttal.
So I think all three parties recognize the ballooning healthcare costs. I mean, they risk driving the country and the provinces into bankruptcy if we don't address them square on. And I think where we have some differences of opinion between the Conservative Party and the two other parties that are here is that we recognize that delivery of health care is a provincial responsibility. And one of the reasons for that is it's more of a local accountability. It's not managed distantly by forces in Ottawa. And that's actually in the Constitution. We respect that jurisdiction. The one thing we have done, to Mr. Marsden's point, was around recognizing foreign credentials. Again, mostly a provincial responsibility, but we're doing things that are in our platform to bridge people while they're getting their foreign credentials recognized, just so we can meet some of the shortages we have for health caregivers in this country. And then finally, maybe I'll just make one point, Mr. Ray. When you were Premier, you know about the slashes to health care transfers that were made by the Liberal Party. That's one thing the Conservative Party will not do. We will not balance the budget on the backs of provincial health care budgets.
Thank you. Now, there's a reason why healthcare wasn't a good part of this debate, because it's hard to break it down into 30-second sound bites, but we're going to try. So, first of all, do you support bulk purchasing of drugs in order to cut down costs of drugs in this country? Reminding ourselves that the provincial budgets are burgeoning with the cost of the drugs that they buy or pay for on behalf of seniors and others. And those are the budgets that are just falling, they're just spiraling through the roof. So bulk purchasing is an opportunity. Do you support bulk purchasing of drugs? Mr. Marsden.
The NDP has always believed in cooperative purchasing power. So the answer is yes, as a group.
Mr. Ray.
Absolutely.
Mr. Trottier.
We would enact legislation to enable the provinces to do that.
Is that a yes or a no?
That is a yes, in the sense that bulk purchases can be made at the provincial level.
Right. Okay, now do you support a national pharmacare program for all Canadians? That's $1 coverage for all Canadians. Mr. Marsden.
Yes, it's a main plank of our platform.
Mr. Trottier.
Yes.
Well, Mr. Ray.
Yes, I do, but we have to I think the first step is dealing with the catastrophic problem. I think we got to do it a step at a time, recognizing that the first real issue that people face is the potentially disastrous consequences of very expensive drug care outside a hospital. And if you're getting cancer care in a hospital, you're covered. If it's not in a hospital, you're not covered.
Correct.
And this is a real burden for families.
Would you expand funding for home care, Mr. Marsden?
Yes.
Mr. Ray?
Yes, absolutely.
Mr. Trottier?
Yes, but we're doing it mainly through tax relief.
How does that add up to?
Sorry, maybe I misspoke. I was thinking in terms of family care, in terms of home care. To the extent that actually relieves pressures on provincial health care budgets, absolutely.
Well, that's the entire purpose of the health care accords, right? Some billions of dollars were transferred from the federal government to the provinces to fund the major priorities in the health care accords.
The key
home
issue,
care being one of them.
But Susan, the key issue there, I don't know, is this allowed?
Go ahead.
Key issue there is that we need in the next round of the Accords to really develop some accountability mechanisms and some transparency mechanisms so more people can see this is where the money's going. Because the federal government is a huge financial partner in the healthcare system. We also run the 5th largest healthcare plan in the country because of our responsibility for Aboriginals and for veterans and other transfers. And I really do think Canadians, I don't agree with Bernard that this is exclusively a provincial jurisdiction. Healthcare is not in the Constitution. The word healthcare does not appear in the Constitution. We have a Canada Health Act. It's never been challenged by any province. So we do have some responsibilities here.
Right. Mr. Trottier, did you want to respond to that?
Well, historically it's been a provincial responsibility, absolutely on the delivery side. And so we think it's sensible for provinces to look at models in the world and experiment and find ways that really suit their needs. One province in particular, Quebec, is very, very defensive about maintaining its territorial responsibility.
I see. Mr. Marsden.
But there's a problem with what you're saying, Bernard. You're saying you're going to give people tax breaks when they've just gone through a crisis. They have to have money. Many Canadians can't even come remotely close to covering the cost of these things, and to have to wait for a tax break, that's very cold-hearted.
Well, I used to be a tax lawyer, and I wasn't a very good one because I used to say to my clients, be happy that you have taxes to pay. It means you're making a lot of money. Okay.
Now I can understand.
Getting back
now
to
I can understand why you changed careers, Susan.
I'm not debating here. Okay. Now, will you fund the training and hiring of more primary care doctors? Mr. Marsden.
Absolutely.
Mr. Trottier.
Well, we do that already, and we want to increase more foreign doctors getting them credentialized in Canada.
This is funding, training, and hiring.
Absolutely. Unlike the Ontario government, which froze spaces for medical practitioners in Ontario, we would continue to play our part.
Thank you. Mr. Ray.
There are hundreds and hundreds of medical students and doctors who are Canadians who are practicing outside the country and who are currently enrolled in universities all over the Commonwealth and in the United States and elsewhere. We have to do more to bring them back, and we have to do more to provide spaces for them in hospitals, and so they get residency training and intern training. And this is a big commitment on the part of the federal government and the provinces. And I think we have to recognize that there is an issue here that has to be addressed.
Thank you.
I hope we can address it.
Now, what is really quite wonderful in this election campaign is that the issue of caregiver support has actually been dealt with by each of the parties. For greater or lesser extent, any one of those things would be a major advantage. Now, is it enough? Mr. Marsden, you have your platform has about $1,300 more per year for family caregivers. Is that enough to help somebody look after their family?
But there's a variety of things. We talked about the renovation of an intergenerational home, so that the cost of a family suite for whoever is joining your family, the figure is caregiver benefit is $1,500 a year, but it's marginal, but it's something. We want to improve unemployment insurance, so there's supports there, as I've indicated before, for 6 months.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I misspoke. Was $1,500? $1,300 was your bid. Is that enough?
No, look, Susan, there's always more good ideas than there is money. We all know that. I mean, that's just one of the realities of life. It's true for us as individuals. It's true for governments. And so you do what you can. That's why we've made the decision to say, look, we're not going to do the corporate tax cuts now. We're going to do them later. That's why there's a distinction between us. Mr. Harper says we're going to give the corporate tax cuts now, and we're going to make everybody else wait for their tax relief until 2015.
Thank you, Mr. Ray.
That's why we're proposing a practical plan that we think is affordable.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. Mr. Trottier, I calculated your caregiver tax credit comes to $300 a year, and only if you have taxes to pay. Is that enough?
It's never enough in the sense that, to Mr. Ray's point, there's always a need for more funds when it comes to that. So people are encouraged, between their various insurance plans, between their savings. I mean, it's one of the things that people tell me in my riding of Etobicoke Lakeshore, again, is that don't make promises you can't afford to keep. There's always gaping holes. Healthcare is consuming more and more of our resources.
When we can afford it. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We'll move on to the third round and final round, and we're focusing on stewardship. And this question is directed to Mr. Marsden, according to our drawing of lots. CARP members consistently demonstrate through our polling that they care very much about the legacy they leave behind for their children and their grandchildren. And that includes the environment, that includes fiscal management, and our institutions of democracy. They recall that Canada had a $14 million surplus in 2006 and surpluses in the years before that, and they want to know what happened to it. They demand fundamental change to the way we deliver public services, not just cutting services or raising taxes. Many served in the military to defend the democratic freedoms we now enjoy, and others grew up through the 60s and 70s, a time of great social and political change, and they are used to being involved in their government. They care about Parliament and our democratic institutions. So, Mr. Marsden, this is the vision thing. In 2 minutes, what will Canada look like in the near future under your party? What environmental legacy will you leave? How will you ensure that rights of older Canadians are protected? The right to work, to not have to confront elder abuse, and to have their elected representatives account to them. Mr. Marsden.
Well, one of the things that Jack Layton did, the previous Parliament, he moved a bill, C-311, that spoke to the environment, That bill was lauded around the world as the most progressive legislation there was. We passed it through Parliament twice, and it got to the Senate, and the unelected Senate killed it, which is reprehensible. Now, I'm one of the believers that our democracy is a very fragile thing. Most countries, if you look at Libya or places like that, you have people dying in the streets to get what we have. In Canada, all we had to do was write a nice letter to the Queen to get our Constitution. So my generation, the boomers, proud to be one, we were more concerned, I think, with the things happening in the world, mainly because of Vietnam and that at the time. So our sense of democracy, I think, is fairly strong. The younger generations, we've got to bring them along, but we've got to give them hope. One of the cynical things that happens is all politicians lie, all politicians cheat, all politicians are in it for themselves. No reason to vote for them because they're all the same. You know who said that? The people in power who don't want change. Because if you believe that and you stay away from the polls, the status quo remains. You look at those young people in Libya and what are they doing? They're using Blackberries and cell phones and they're communicating. Remember the other line, don't talk religion or politics at the kitchen table? Who said that? The people in power who didn't want change. As soon as you start talking to one another, you'll identify the problems of seniors to your government. You'll hold them accountable. The point I made earlier, you're the largest growing demographic in our country. You can hold Parliament to account. I think one of the worst things that ever happened to our Parliament was putting cameras in there, because people are shooting for the 30-second soundbite and they're not getting into the depth of issues that they should. You can change that because you're a force and a growing force. Thank you.
Mr. Ray.
I think the generation of which I'm a member has had a huge effect on our politics and our policies up until now. And I think it will have a huge impact on our politics and policies for the foreseeable future. I think we need an environmental Bill of Rights. I think we need stronger action on climate change. I think we need to have a greater sense that we are stewards for the future and that we are taking care of this. We're handing it to the next generation, but in a sense we're also borrowing it from the next generation. I think the country has reached a very profound consensus, and in fact it's interesting in the platforms that you'll notice, every party has agreed that we've got to get the budget balance back. We've got to get back to surpluses. There's no disagreement here. When we get the economy gets into a better position, we want to get there. The real question is, what are our priorities in getting there? Who comes first? I think Mr. Ignatieff has made it very clear that for us in the Liberal Party, we want to do more for working families right now, and we're asking the banks and the oil companies to hold back a bit until we're into a balanced situation. Mr. Harper's doing the opposite. He's saying the banks and the oil companies come first, other people will have to wait. That's an important difference of choice. And as I said at the beginning of this conversation, this really election is as much about character and about the quality of our democracy as it is about a whole bunch of other things, about policy ideas and other things. And I'm very troubled by what's happened to our democracy. I'm troubled by the corrosive nature of our politics. I'm troubled by the character assassination that we see on television every night and the very negative ads being put out by the Conservative Party. I see the debate, and I've have the benefit of having been a rising star in 5 decades in provincial politics and federal politics. I've been in a lot of debates. I've seen the House of Commons come and go. It has become more adversarial, and it has become more corrosive. And this is something we have to change. And I think to change it, we have to change the guy at the top, because the Prime Minister holds real responsibility for what's been allowed to happen to the quality of our politics.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ray. Mr. Trottier.
Well, let me share with you a certain optimism that I have. People tell me, and I share with them this attitude, that Canada is the greatest country in the world. We're the envy of the world in so many ways right now. We really take care of people who need help. You don't see some of the abject poverty like you see in many other countries. One thing that I'm also very optimistic about is the degree of citizen participation. Part of it is just the reality of technology. People are more informed than ever before. I think compared to a generation ago, people are now very in tune with what's going on, whether it's through internet, through social media, or whatever. And so when people ask me very intelligent questions at the doorstep, I can tell they're very passionate about democracy and very passionate about the issues that affect them. So I'm very optimistic about Canada. I'm very optimistic about our political institutions in the sense that we're one of the world's oldest democracies now. And we're showing leadership around the world. Whether we get involved militarily or diplomatically, we're leading the way. And I think our Prime Minister and our current government has recognized that all the great things that we can do, the real meaningful things in life, whether it's arts, it's science, it's education, it's healthcare, all of that, the money has to come from somewhere. And so our plan and our focus and our priority has been to have a very strong, vibrant, rich, wealth-creating economy. Part of our brand as a country is that this is a place where you can do business, you can capture a return on investment. It's not just oil companies and banks, it's manufacturing companies, it's railroads, it's everybody, every business in this country wants to be able to get that return on investment. Whether you're a shareholder, whether you're an employee, that's very important to lay the foundation for all of those very, very important things in our society. So we're not going to attack businesses, we're not going to penalize people for making investments and for hiring people. We're going to encourage them, and that'll be part of how Canada positions itself in the world.
Thank you, Mr. Trottier. Mr. Morrison, 1 minute rebuttal.
Well, not to be afraid to go back and forth, so I have to put a point to Mr. Ray or Bob. And it's this fact that the current tax breaks that are happening, last year the banks made $22 billion. They gave $11 billion in bonuses, and they were able to do that because the Liberals supported the tax cuts with the Conservatives. I mean, that's what's happening now. Now, Mr. Ignatieff had a deathbed conversion to the NDP's view of the world because we said we should never be cutting the fiscal capacity of our country to this degree. And I guess it's one of those things that's mixed emotions for me because I said, thank goodness they did come to understand that. Looking at the GIS and what all three parties are talking about doing, we said there was 250,000 seniors living in poverty. We wanted to give them $700 million. That's $135 a month. Conservatives in their budget said, oh, we'll give a break to them over $680,000. So that's about $50 a month. It still leaves those seniors in poverty. And the Liberals' plan, $700 million sounds good, but that's spread across 1.6 million people. The people in poverty will still stay there.
Thank you,
Little
Mr.
wonder
Marston.
people don't trust us.
Thank you, Mr. Marston. Now, the last rapid round, very simple. Now, one of the parties has already addressed an issue that we have raised. Well, all of the parties have addressed many of our issues, but one of them we focused on was elder abuse. It's something that we've talked about at length, and so little has been done despite the fact that everybody cares about it. And we called for an amendment to the criminal code to make sure that the sentencing provision of the criminal code would actually contain a clause that gave a heavier sentence if there was elder abuse. Now, the Conservatives have put that into their campaign promises, so I'm going to ask the other two. Will you add it to your platform now before the end of the election, Mr. Marston?
We have trouble with mandatory sentencing. Certainly elder abuse is a serious problem, but we have in our code right now the ability to charge violent crime, and they should be treated as a violent crime.
Well, this is not a mandatory sentence, but an exacerbation. It's also the same provision that deals with hate crimes. Mr. Ray.
Yeah, I support with respect to the adding elder abuse to. There are some egregious examples, terrible examples of abuse. I think it's something that should be focused on by the courts, but I am concerned by the haphazard use of mandatory minimums across the board, because I do think this is going to lead to huge issues of overcrowding in our prisons, and it's not something. It's one of the enthusiasms of the Conservative Party that
let me make myself
don't share.
clear. Thank you, Mr. Ray. Let me make myself clear. This particular provision that we're asking for at CARP is to have the additional sentencing that could add to the sentence that normally might have been given for an assault between two young men, for example. And that's the section. We're not calling for mandatory minimums. So I'm going to encourage the campaigns to add that to their platform so that we'll see that a reality no matter who wins the election. All right. Now, will you support employers' incentives to hire and retain older workers? Mr. Ray.
Yes, I think we need to work with the provinces on that, because it's also going to be something that's going to be affected at the provincial level. But I do think we need to keep encouraging and providing opportunities for people to continue to work.
The amazing thing about tax incentives is they work.
If they want to.
That's
if
right.
seniors want to work, that's good.
That's right. Mr. Trottier.
Yeah, in fact, and we've done that for not quite seniors, the soon-to-be seniors and people in the 55 to 65 age category. We've increased the funding for the program to allow people to transition to new careers.
Right. Mr. Marston.
Number one, we'd like to have a pension system that is adequate to the degree that people are able to retire in dignity. If they can't, they need to supplement themselves, so yes.
Mr. Marsden again, will you bring back the long-form census?
Yes, absolutely.
Mr. Trottier?
It'd be purely voluntary, given some of the pushback we've had from segments.
We're talking
of society.
mandatory. Mr. Ray?
Voluntary doesn't work. If we want to return our country to statistical respectability, we absolutely have to have a return to the long-form census.
Right. Mr. Ray, will you make all your MP expenses public?
They already are.
Mr. Trottier?
Absolutely.
Mr. Marsden. So who was it that refused to let the Auditor General have them again, or the Public Expenses Committee? Didn't happen, though. Okay.
It's inside politics.
Inside politics. Well, we're watching inside very carefully. Would you limit the power to prorogue Parliament, Mr. Trottier?
No, prorogation is it's in our traditions, it's been in our Parliament for centuries. The Liberal government prorogued Parliament 4 times in 13 years. We've done it twice in 5. It's a normal procedure.
Mr. Ray.
We've set it out very clearly what the changes in the rules have to be because of the way in which they've been abused. Mr. Harper used prorogation entirely wrongly to stop a vote of non-confidence in his government and then to stop an investigation into the Afghan detainee issue. So I think we have to have rules that limit the power of the Prime Minister to prorogue.
Mr. Marsden.
I agree that we have to have rules that limit it, but we certainly should not consider setting it aside. But the reality is when it's used for political gamesmanship, as we've just seen, as Bob's indicated, that's a violation of the trust of the Canadian people.
You know what? Let's talk about the inside politics stuff for a problem because, I guess now I'm in the company of policy wonks. We're watching everything that happens in Parliament and we care too deeply, and so do our members, by the way. We poll them on these things. Do you really think that the Speaker's rulings were nothing, procedural issues, or did you really think that they were an important measure of our Parliament? And our members care a lot. So on their behalf, I have to ask you these questions. So please, explain to me why the Speaker's rulings were just not very important, win some, lose some. Mr. Marsden?
Well, first of all, they were significantly important. I mean, we asked this government to produce papers to the committees so that we could make the judgments that Canadians elect us to go to Parliament to make. And they said no, and they cited confidence or security reasons. And the Speaker said, no, you don't have the right to do that. This is a right of Parliament. If a CEO of a company said to the Board of Directors, I'm sorry, I'm going to spend a third of your budget, but I'm not going to tell you what on, I'm not going to give you the details, he'd be looking for another job.
Okay, Mr. Trottier.
Yeah, so on the specific issue of what's called contempt of Parliament, I mean, let's be clear. There was a majority of the opposition parties on committees who asked for an enormous volume of documentation related to some spending estimates.
Was it the volume or detail?
It was the volume and the detail. And so what was unprecedented was the volume of information we actually did provide. And still the committee decided to put forward a motion of contempt. It was parliamentary procedure as opposed to the substance of what was at hand.
I see. Mr. Ray.
Well, Charles I lost his head over parliamentary procedure. I mean, these are important issues. This is really about the people. It's not about Parliament. It's about what information does the public have. And the critical issue here is what information do we have about some very important spending items. The fighter jets, where the Dutch Parliament has been told the cost is going to be about 80% higher than the original estimate, where the U.S. Congress has been told it's going to be 100% higher than the original estimate. And we need to have that information. The public needs to have that information. It's not about us, it's about the public.
Thank you. Regrettably, we've come to the end of the debate. And I want to let everybody know, first of all, that I took the precaution of pinning all of the gentlemen. They are now all honorary CARP members. And I had my picture taken with each of them. You never know. Right?
Yeah, but you better be careful because you might not be asked into a meeting if you've got your picture with me and Wayne.
Well, there you go. That's right. That's true. There's a problem with that. I'll take my chances. I'll take my chances with that. We're still in a democracy. So there's a closing statement. 1 minute each, please, gentlemen. And there's strangely the same speaking order as before. So we will start first with Mr. Marsden, I believe.
Well, thank you, Susan. And again, I want to thank CARP for this opportunity. I think seniors' issues are marginally higher up on the totem pole than what they were in previous elections. Again, I stress to you the power that you're starting to grow into and your ability to ensure that politicians address those things that we all know people need. It's reprehensible that 300,000 Canadians, mostly women, are living in poverty. 204 veterans in Calgary, the richest city in our country, are registered at a food bank. That's wrong. And that's the kind of things that you have when you have a Parliament who has a Prime Minister who has contempt for Canadians and contempt for Parliament. We have to change this. So I invite you to consider the NDP's platform, consider what we've represented for years in healthcare and rights and justice, and vote for the NDP on Election Day, May 2nd. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Mr. Trottier.
So first of all, thanks again to CARP. Now, we all understand and appreciate the contributions that seniors make in our society. In this regard, I appreciate being invited to take part in today's useful discussion on issues important to seniors. The Conservative record for seniors has been very, very strong. Our platform for seniors, contained in the budget, focuses on significant tax relief and greater assistance for lower-income seniors, specifically lower-income seniors, because they're the ones who are most in need. These are things like the Family Caregiver Program, Enhanced GIS, and so forth. Your choice, in fact, the choice of all Canadians, is very clear. It's the opposition's high-tax program, which will stifle jobs, stifle economic activity in this country to fund various programs, or the Conservative low-tax plan for jobs and growth, economic activity, which will fund programs, will fund health care, will fund vital services, and allow Canada to grow and flourish in the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you, Mr. Trottier. Mr. Ray.
Thank you so much. It's been a great discussion. Can't help referring to Bernard's last point about high tax. It's not high tax, it's whose tax. That's the issue. The issue is who's going to pay and when are they going to pay. I think the choices have been very clear. Mr. Ignatieff's made it very clear. This is an election about choices being an agenda that puts people first now and that addresses those questions now, and an agenda that says, no, the people can wait and we're going to let some of the big cats do a little better more quickly. We have to have a growing economy. We have to have an economy that works. We also have to have an economy that works for people. And for all people, if I may say so, not just for seniors. Yes, for seniors, but for young people, for new immigrants who are coming into the country, for people who are looking for their first job, as well as for people who want to continue working. We've had a good discussion on the issues that really affect people as they get older in our society. We need also to broaden that discussion to include everybody who lives in this great and wonderful country. It is a great country. Let's make it greater. Let's have a Liberal government again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, first of all, let's have another rousing round of applause for all of these gentlemen. And one of these gentlemen will be in government after May 2nd.
Or perhaps all three.
And perhaps all three.
Maybe we'll have a coalition.
Remember that Mr. Trottier has just invited himself to be part of a coalition. Now, one of the things that I will be doing is reviewing the tape, taking down where I found agreement among the three parties, and issuing a news release to say, by the way, they've all agreed to do these things. Why can't we have it first up on May 2nd, May 3rd? Thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you very much to Bob Ray, Bernard Trottier, and Wayne Marsden for participating in this debate. And thanks to CARP and Susan Eng for presenting this special event. We hope that this exchange will help you decide which party can best represent you and your loved ones on these crucial issues. And we want to hear from you. Let us know who you think won the day by going to carp.ca and clicking on Zoomer Debate. And please remember to vote in the poll that matters most, the federal election on May the 2nd. That's it for Zoomer Issues, Zoomer Candidates, a Zoomer Debate. I'm Libby Znaimer.
Thank you. That was good.